what this class will be, and it's a follow-on from last week, in the sense that a lot of the software that's coming out today, and it has been out, like Topaz Labs, are all presets, mostly presets. And when I went through the Silver Effects Pro, you saw how many presets there were. You could just click on it and it makes the image. And what I realized by doing the classes, and even when I was doing in-person classes, it's a very difficult path to follow to learn all the tools in Photoshop and what's the best way to use them and so on. So I understand the desire to have presets because you click it, boom, there it is. And then you can refine it. And I think that's why Photoshop is moving in that direction. And I think Photoshop move in that direction because Luminar is really coming out with a lot of things. So the other part of this class today, I'm going to show you some Luminar aspects, and I'm only getting into Luminar at this point very minimally, only because it's another whole area to study. But a lot of neat things can be done in Luminar, including black and whites and enhancements and all kinds of things. Today, I'm going to show you how to put a sun ray into your image. Very easy, very neat to do. And Luminar just announced that if you are replacing a sky and you have a water foreground, that it will put it into the reflection in the water also, do it for you. And you could put birds in the sky. That's just amazing stuff. So the idea of these classes, and yet last week and this week, is to show you some of the easier ways to get a good idea of what an image could or should look like, and then you can refine it from there, and to encourage you to do enhancements to an image. As in digital, right out of the camera is not that much of a good, interesting image. So I'll go through that. And the other thing is I'm going to mute everyone. And if you want to ask a question, just hold down the space bar and you can ask it and then let go. That way we won't get a lot of background noise and a number of things happen when I don't do it. So I'm going to mute everyone at this point. So here we have a color image, and you think, well, what should I do with it? This is a sort of a review of last week. Very easy to take it into Adobe Camera Raw. And every time I start working on a new image, the first thing I do is take it into Adobe Camera Raw. Now, I know the sliders really well, so I don't as much go to these profiles and presets, but let's see them. So on this image, at the top of the screen where it says color, click on the little down arrow and you can browse. Click the browse and you have a number of things you can look at, artistic. So if I tap the arrow there and then if you place your cursor over each of the ones on the right-hand side, you see what the image would look like given that particular preset or profile. These are profiles. So I'll try that one and I'll try modern just to see what it's doing. Oh, that looks very nice. Modern 3 looks very good. And then again, the aspect of this, Modern 7 looks good, that it gives you a way to look at the image without trying to think, what slider will I use? Well, what would I do in Photoshop? So you can do this and then go back to Photoshop. And the way you would go back to Photoshop is at the top of the screen on the right, you see the little arrow and the word back, and that'll take you back into Adobe Camera Raw. I'm sorry, not Photoshop, Adobe Camera Raw. So I'm going to select one here. In fact, I'm going to do black and white because I want you to see what can be done with black and white. So I'll come down to the black and white and hold the cursor over each of these and allow you to see it. Let me come back to the top for this reason. I've had a lot of training in black and white printing, and I spent 10 years in the darkroom making fine art black and white prints. And a lot of that influence came from reading Ansel Adams' books and from studying with John Sexton, who was Ansel Adams' assistant for many years. So my approach to black and white is very much an Ansel Adams approach, which is detail in the shadows where your mind expects to see detail, and detail in the highlights where your mind expects to see detail. Now in this image, up in the sky, I would expect to see some detail in the highlights. and down in the foreground, some detail in the shadows. So as I'm placing my cursor over the various profiles, these are profiles, I look at that black and white aspect and say, oh, yes, okay, I see. Well, the trees in the background, a little black, they're really blocked out there. I could lighten them when I get it back into Adobe Camera Raw, but this one looks really good. So black and white number 8 looks good. Black and white 7 looks very, or 5 rather, 6, black and white 6 looks very good. Now, black and white 4 has a lot of punch to it, which is good. And you say, wow, but I see up there in the left, those trees have lost detail. And in the foreground, down in the center of the foreground, the grasses in the dark area have lost the detail. So if I come back up to the upper one, I can see that there are pixels there. That means I can adjust this when I go back into Adobe Camera Raw. So if I particularly like this one, I could do that, and I'll show that to you in a minute. But the difference between this one, black and white 4, and black and white 6 is look at the sky. See the black and white sky? See the sky in the black and white 4, it's sort of blown out. And yes, I could darken that, but if I come down to this one, it has nice detail up in the sky area. So the better choice for this is black and white 5 rather than black and white 4. So I look at each of these that way. Oh, let's see, black and white 8 versus black and white 6. Black and white 6 looks good. Black and white 8, that's still a little bright up there. I think that black and white 6 looks good. Black and white 8, some nice texture up in the sky in black and white 8. So I'll click on that one. I'm up to the top where it is back into Adobe Camera Raw. I'll click the little back arrow, and I'm back in Adobe Camera Raw. And I can go to the Basic tab now and go to the Shadow slider and move it to the right a little bit, and it opens up those dark shadows even more. So now I have some nice detail there, and just darken the highlights a little bit, and I have nice texture in the sky. Some final things you want to do in a black and white print, when you're doing it this easy way, is to come down to Effects, which is Vignette. And then when you come down to the vignette, if on the right-hand side, that little arrow on the right-hand side of the word vignetting is not pointing downward, click on it to get the remaining sliders that are there. So that when you move the vignette to the left, you then can feather it nicely so that it's not such a hard darkening of the sides. Smooth that out a little bit by feathering. Now let's take this back to Photoshop and look at the black and white now, how it has depth. This image has a foreground, a middle ground, and the background. And the middle ground is nicely highlighted and brighter than the sky. I would do just a few more changes to this related to the dodge and burn. But look how much we've accomplished with just clicking on a preset and then opening up the shadows and darkening the highlights. We've done a tremendous amount on this. Go back to history and let's look at open from the color image to the black and white. And here's the only other aspects I would do on this image is to get the burn tool on midtones at about 10% or so, and run it across the top, mostly in the middle of the top, to bring out some of those clouds to force your eye down in more into the center of the image. Watch the difference from those burnings from here to here, how much more that texture and detail you have in that highlights and the highlights up there, and how much more I've brought your eye down into the center. Look at that again, from here to here. And a black and white, the highlights and the tonal range are extremely important. much more so than color, because we can look into color and we see things, but not the same in black and white. The next thing I would do is on the dodge tool on midtones and just bring out a little bit more. I have it at, say, 15 or 16. And I would bring out a little bit more detail in those trees in the background. Because as I had studied, those kinds of things that Ansel would do is to show detail in that area. Say, well, really, really? No. Let's take a look. Here it is. Before that, you see how solid they are. Now you see into them. You see three-dimensionality. The other thing I would do here is to give you a little bit more light in the foreground. So I'll change the dodge to highlights. Keep it at about 10%. Make my brush a little bigger and just lighten these grasses in the foreground to tie into that reflection highlight. And that's it. So here is the results of the changes I've just made in Photoshop once we brought it back in. Sky is darker. See how your eye goes right into the middle of that image? That's very nice looking black and white. And I also suggest that you let an image sit for a day or two and come back in and look at it again. And I guarantee you, you'll make some additional changes on it. I think I'll save
John,
it. Yes, sir.
the color picture, the original color, is that
Yes.
gone forever or is it workable someplace?
It's workable. In fact, good question. And always before you, I just saved this image. So this image has only one layer. It's the background layer and it's black and white. But if I come back up to, and I changed it, changed the name so that when I saved it, I'm saving the black and white. So I do a save as, and I'm changing it as I'm saving as a black and white. So it will not override the color image because I've changed the name. Or you could, if you thought you've messed somehow, save this under whatever name you want, then come back up to your history, click on open, and then go save as, and save it as the original name, and you'll always have both.
Thank you.
One last point on this one, turns it into a black and white, but let's go a little bit review of what we did last week, is to take it into Adobe Camera Raw and look at it from the standpoint of a color image. So to come over to the profile, do the drop down, go to browse, and let's do artistic and see what we come up with artistic. And there are some really nice presentations. This one is very nice. Artistic 07. It will need some darkening and things. And Artistic 05 has a really good look to it. There's detail in the trees in the background, color in the sky. I would go with that one easily. In fact, I'll do that. And if I come back up to the right at the top of the vertical toolbar and click on, well, before I go back into Photoshop, at the bottom of the vertical toolbar, I'll click on the presets. And you have color, neutral, right, high contrast. Look at the changes that you can make in an image just by coming in here and going across any one of these. Pick one.
John, where is the preset again? Located before that one.
The presets are on the right-hand side of the vertical bar in Adobe Camera Raw, and it looks like two little circles overlapping each other. You see those? You see where my cursor is?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Those are the presets. And you also can do black and white in here. So you have multiple ways of looking at and creating a black and white image just by doing overlaps and seeing what you like. But let me do the color here so that we take it back in and see the difference of that. Now to get back into Adobe Camera Raw, at the top of the vertical bar are a bunch of little squigglies and things. You click that, that takes you back into Adobe Camera Raw. And then, of course, you can say, okay, and that takes you back into Photoshop. So the difference of just doing some presets and not doing much more on those at all, look at the difference of just that. Again, I'm showing you how to do things from an easy standpoint. I hope that you see it as easy, so that you then take it from here and do more things with it. Because it's very difficult to learn all the tools and what did that tool do and how's that changing? I don't know. So the presets are very good. And that's where a lot of the software is going, is into presets. Go to a different image now.
John,
Yes, sir.
what level would you rate the quality of the presets?
I think you mean in relation to themselves in Photoshop or related to
In relation to, let's say, what you would bring a photo to.
I think they are about 80% of what I would bring it to. I think they're that good.
So John,
Yes.
so I mean, for me, not that as I understand it, the difference between a profile in Adobe Camera Raw and a preset in Adobe Camera Raw is that a profile won't change any of the sliders, but the presets are actually effectively changing the sliders much the same way as you would otherwise do it.
That's true.
Is there
That's true.
other more extensive definition of how to distinguish between?
Oh, that's very good. So let's pick up on that, and I'll take an image, we'll take it in there, and I'll show everyone what you're talking about. Here's an image that when I look at it, right away my mind says something needs to be done to the sky. I want more drama in that sky, and to push my eye down into the image. So what I'm explaining now is when you look at your image, what is it that you really want to have done to it to bring it out the way, sort of a presentation to anybody that they would say, wow, yes. It's interesting to me, and a number of the images, this is not my image. I pulled this off the web, and it's interesting that I've seen so many that are waterfalls and the water's blue. And I think, you didn't see blue water while you were standing there. Come on, that isn't right. So I would want that corrected. So I think through how I want this image to look in the sense of, well, we'll bring some drama to it. And how can I force the eye to go where I want it to go? So then I would take it into Adobe Camera Raw. And I'll explain what Arnie just talked about there. So in Adobe Camera Raw, I'll go to the profiles first and click on Browse, come down to the artistic. Let's see what some of those will do. Well, that does, the first one doesn't, it's wrong. Oh, that's looking better. The sky's looking better. This one brings out too much blue. That one doesn't work. I like the contrast level of this and the colors in the foreground, and the sky's looking pretty good. We may need to adjust the sky when we get back into Adobe Camera Raw specifically. And that looks pretty good. So let me show you this one. I'll click on this and go back to Camera Raw. And you see all the sliders are neutral. Nothing has been changed. If I come over to the right-hand side in the vertical bar and click on presets, and then pick one of the presets, let's select one of these. We'll try this one. Come up to the top of the vertical bar, back into Adobe Camera Raw, you see that some of the sliders are changed. See where clarity has been changed, saturation has been changed. So it actually, what Arnie was pointing out is the profile doesn't change any of those sliders, but a preset will change the sliders based on whatever preset you have selected.
John,
Yes, sir.
after you pick a preset and save it, can Photoshop still change the sky?
Yes, in fact, that's what I'm going to do. Yes, great. See, that sky to me is, oh, come on now. And the dehaze is the perfect slider for adjusting a sky to do some drama. Oh, usually overall it does that. Look at that sky is doing now. it is really coming together. It has brought out that blue, and all I did was move the dehaze slider. That is really wonderful slider. So now see how your eye is coming back down, and there's still a little bit of a highlight here in the sky that I think is too bright. So I'll go to the highlight slider and darken those a little, which brings a little bit more drama to the sky. And I may need to do something in Photoshop with that really bright area. But more importantly to me, and this is just personal, is that the water is so blue. And one of the ways to handle that very nicely in Adobe Camera Raw is to come down to Color Mixer. And you see the word says adjust, HSL. To the far right, there's a circle with a plus sign on it. That's a targeted adjustment tool is what that's called. So when I click that, it turns it on, and I'll come to the saturation, not luminance and not hue, but saturation. Now, when I put my cursor on where I don't want that blue, and I press the left mouse button and move it to the left, you notice the sliders are moving automatically based on what color I'm reducing. And in some cases, you could say, well, why don't you just go over and move the blue slider? Because some cases, the color is a mix of blue and purple and aqua. And by putting the cursor on the image itself and doing that, it picks the various colors that might be in there. But I just remove a lot of the blue in this case because it didn't pick any other color. So we took it into a preset. We came back, looked at the sliders that they already had, and the only other slider in basic that I changed, there are two of them, the highlights and dehaze. The other sliders were automatically moved based on the preset. I'll take this back in. Well, before I take it back in, I often look at vignetting. So come back down to effects, give a little bit more vignette. Why? And the reason is that bright corners tend to bring your eye back down to those corners. And if I give a little vignetting, that pushes your eye back into the center. And I'll readjust. Often, if you're not accustomed to doing a vignetting, here's what I suggest. Take the vignette slider and move it way to the left so that it becomes very dark. That way you can adjust the feathering based on that heavy part, then back off the vignetting so that it's just what you need. That's a nicer way to handle that and see how the effect it's having. So we'll take this back into Photoshop.
John, can I throw in another question?
Absolutely.
When you dehaze the picture for the sky and to enhance the sky, it dehazes the entire picture. Can you dehaze just the sky?
Yes, good question, and I'll show that to you next. You're my best straight man today. That's wonderful. Here we have the highlight in the sky. But before I go anywhere and show you what you just asked, I want to darken that little area to keep the highlight down in that area. And that's part of my learning from Ansel and the prints that I saw from his, that it just is. And I don't want your eye going to that bright spot. I want you to come down into here. And even on the water now, there's some areas here that I want to darken those so that they're not so bright. The other thing before I talk about how to do the sky separately, I would go to the saturation, the sponge tool, because I want you to concentrate on this image in through here. So if I bring a little bit of color, and I'm doing this at 26%, some little color down into this, and it's brightening it and bringing color in at the same time. And the way you know that that's happening is up in the options bar, there's a word that says vibrance. If you have that checked on, it not only increases the color, it increases the brightness. So just for this image, and then I'll show you the sky. Let's go all the way back. Here's the open. There's the camera raw. And here are the final adjustments. What a difference. Let's go back just to open. And I didn't do a lot of sophisticated things with sliders inside of Adobe Camera Raw. So to go to the questions, before I would, let's assume I bring this back in and I have the image as it is, and I want to affect only the sky. Way to do that is to make a selection of the sky. And there's now a capability, if you go up to select, you can say select sky, and it will run through your image looking for what it suspects to be the sky, which in most cases is going to be very, very nicely selected for you. And in this case, it did a really good job. So now if I go from Photoshop into Adobe Camera Raw, Adobe Camera Raw will only work on what you did as a selection. So my steps would be in this image is come down to dehaze, change the sky, click OK, comes back to Photoshop, remove the dancing ants. Now I have the sky and I can adjust it anywhere. And then I would take this image as it is into Adobe Camera Raw and do a profile or a preset. But I wanted to show you today black and white. So let me do this in black and white. So I'll go to, we adjusted the sky. Let me darken just a little bit in that highlight area, because that's just bothering me down in here.
So did you say that you would, in your workflow, you would have done the dehaze of the slot of the sky first, and then gone in initially, and then gone into Adobe Camera Raw again and do the profiles and or presets at that point after you did the sky?
No, on this image, it worked either way. And the only reason I did it as a separate exercise to show you the selection of sides, because the question was, suppose I wanted to adjust only the sky. In that case, would do the select sky and then take it in, then come back. But in most cases, I just take it in to, say most cases, 90% of the time, take it right into Adobe Camera Raw, do the profile or the presets, but I'm extremely familiar with all the sliders, so I would use the dehaze, then go to the profile, then go to the preset. So the idea, though, of these classes,
the advantage of it here was that when you took the blue out of the water, you did lose some of the blue that was in the sky as a result of the dehaze.
That's correct.
Here you were able to recover that blue.
Absolutely, right.
John,
Good point, yes.
when you use a black and white profile, you basically have given up, once you go into Photoshop, the ability to change tonal range by adjusting colors, have you not?
Yes, yeah.
Going back to Arnie's question, you said you would bring it into Camera Raw and dehaze it. That would dehaze the whole picture.
Well, I would have done, actually, I would have done what you had asked, which is select the sky, dehaze it, then take it back in and do it.
Okay. Thank you.
But the idea is, you guys are really getting this really well, and you're getting more sophisticated at it. So that's wonderful. For those who aren't as familiar, take it in to Adobe Camera Raw, do some things, and so on. And as you get to learn more and more, you'll learn about the sky, and you'll say, well, I'd like to do that separate. But today, the idea was to show you some straightforward ways. The other thing now is to do a black and white. And let's take this one directly into the presets for black and white and just run down it, see what it looks like. Again, detail in the shadows, detail in the highlights. And let's see which one looks. This is a much too contrasty for me. This is looking good, but it's also very contrasty in the smaller areas of the black and white. This looks really good. Let's compare it to the top one. This one, that takes away from the whites more. This is black and white, low contrast. I can always bring contrast back. That's way too contrasty. Black and white soft is okay, pretty good. Infrared, I think the infrared preset, by the way, is really interesting. You should just play with that. Bring some of your images in and turn them into a black and white preset. And if I have time here, or maybe next week, I'll do a preset like this because then I could take it into Adobe Camera Raw, take it back to Adobe Camera Raw and do some adjustments. In fact, I'll do that. We'll do that on this one. But let me just show you the way you could look at the various ways of black and white. Here's a sepia. And I would say that the capabilities related here to black and white and in the profiles of black and white come very close, but not as effective as you'll find in Silver Effects Pro. But here you are at an early stages of learning the black and white and learning other things. So it's a good way to get started and a good way to do things. Let's do the infrared. There's the infrared. Put it back into Photoshop. And I'll take it back to Adobe Camera Raw. Go to the basic slider. And let's see what happens if now I take it into the profiles. Now I'm just playing. And that's the neat thing about doing some of this stuff is you can just play with this. Hold on. Oh, it's doing the monochrome because it is a monochrome. Let's come back over here. Black and white, sepia. No, I see. I didn't realize that once you've done black and white, it keeps it, well, infrared in this case. But I can do some things that I want to have done here. And that is that I can keep the shadows the way they are, lower the highlights a little bit so that I could bring in a little bit more texture into these areas. Down to vignette it. Add a little bit of contrast, not a lot, because I don't want to lose the details. Back to Adobe Camera Raw, use the burn tool. Just darken a few areas here to bring your eye back into the center of this image. And running the burn on midtones across the sky, a little bit on the edge, a little bit on the right-hand edge. Keep the shadows really good. A little bit through the center. Get the dodge tool on highlights at a very low percent, 11%. And just open up some of the areas where I want you to look instantly in through here. Now that I see this mountain back there, my eye says, darken that just a little bit more so that creates more of the three-dimensionality back there. Dark against light creates three-dimensionality, and that's what I'm getting here in the foreground also on each side. So here it is. Let's take it from, well, we can take it from the open, which is color, coming back into Camera Raw, coming back from Camera Raw, doing some adjustments. Now that has much more impact. Probably would let this one sit and come back another day, and I would bet, just guessing on how I've seen things, come back and do a levels adjustment on this image, just a little bit, because I can see I have some room on the highlight side. I can move that slider in, brighten it up a little bit, move the middle slider to the right, which creates more contrast. Moving the white slider to the left so that you're not blowing out any of the highlights, and moving the middle slider to the right, which darkens the midtones, but doesn't block up the blacks as much. You get a little bit more contrast. I'll turn this off. See, that looks flat to me. Now, when I put that on, I get more three-dimensionality look to this image.
John,
Yes.
does Photoshop or Camera Raw have any adjustment such as Nick does structure?
What do you mean by structure? I don't remember what that is.
In Nick software, there's a structure in Viveza, and I believe it's in Silver Effects also. I'm not sure.
Is it the sliders, the individual little sliders around a circle. Is that what you're talking about? I'll look at it and
I think structure is is just a derivative of sharpening at some level.
I see. Yes,
Does that sound right, Joel?
yes, it does. Yeah, that does to me. I don't remember the name. The other thing is, I'm looking at this image. Aspect of this image is, I think, I'm going to save this two different ways. I'll do a save as and save it as JM1. Go to image size,
You're breaking up, John.
disconnect the. Okay, am I back? Yes,
Yes.
can you hear me?
We can hear you now. We lost you
Ah,
again.
all right. Disconnect the width, make it from 11, I'll make it 12.5. Probably could make that even more. This looks much better as a long horizontal. So I would write on the first time I do something, I'll do it a little piece at a time so that I can build up to see how it really works. And I can then judge it by the previous adjustment. So let me make this one more change to me. And how your eyes centered in the middle and the highlights and the shadows on the rocks. There's detail. You could even do a little bit more improvement by doing the dodge tool on midtones and opening up some of the shadows on the rock over here, being sure you're down here in the left corner area where the so dark. Just open up some of those areas of detail back in here.